Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Spooky Mysteries. Today, we are going to wrap up an episode I started a year ago called A Dark Day in Allende Unraveling the Massacre. Now, for those of you that don't know, in Allende, Mexico, which is in the Allende, Coahuila, it's a little border town. And in that town was the cartels at one point. There probably still are. Who knows? I'm not going to say yes or no, right? So, and you already know how I feel about doing episodes about the cartel. I'd like to stay away from it as much as I can, but I have to finish this episode. It's been a year in the making, and it took me a week to write the script. Not because it took me a long time to write it, because it took me a while to figure out how to say what I wanted to say. Then I had multiple people read it. It's been proofread. It's a very difficult episode because of certain reasons. And I mentioned it in the first part, what these reasons are, right? If you want to go back and find it, go for it. If not, oh well. But this is going to wrap up the story, and it talks a lot about what happened. So let's begin. Let's start with a little recap about what happened before. So in a border town in Allende, Mexico, was the cartels, mainly the Zetas. And long story short, something happened on the US side that got leaked information to Mexico, which led in the cartels clearing out. Now, when cartels leave a place, they don't just leave because there's people that work for them in the town. They're not just going to leave those people there. Those are potential informants, right? So they took care of people. 300 plus people have disappeared and or have been killed. Now, I say disappeared. There's a small hope, but it's been like 12 years. They still haven't found them. I hate to say it, you know? And what was this leak? This information? On the US side, one of their people got turned and he had a PIN number for the phones that they were using over here. So they were able to track them and know exactly where they were, which is why they cleared out of this small town, which is Allende, Coahuila. Now, on to the main part of the story, because this is where everything wraps up, right? But before we begin, you can find the complete 400-page dossier about all this information at nsaarchive.gw.edu. Also, anytime I say redacted, it's that all information related to that person was removed due to legal reasons. No, I don't like that. Hold on. I got to increase the speed here on my teleprompter. Was removed due to the nature of the case. And it's technically still an ongoing investigation. And also, the other reason was they were higher ups and attempts on their lives were a real thing, a real possibility. So this is a tough one, you know? It is one of the most difficult conversations I've had. I'm not going to use a teleprompter. I'm just going to do this. So to pick up where I left off, we had just discussed how the cook told us that he was cooking bodies till 6 in the morning. After the cooking was done, the ashes were thrown in a well and later covered and flattened so no one would see anything. This corruption went all the way up, with all the evidence being destroyed. They destroyed as much as they can. They went through, like I said, they swept the town. 300 plus people in this small town are missing. The cartels know what they're doing when it comes to disappearing. It may not look good, but they will be gone. Like I said, there were convictions. That's how we got these testimonies. But the corruption is this. These are the people that are higher up. Juan Ariel Hernandez Ramos was a commander of the Allende police. This guy reported to the police director he is the most senior public official sentenced in the case. Another top guy in this case was Germán Zaragoza Sanchez, known as El Canelo, a Zetas member, and Fernando Hernandez Reyes, an Allende officer. So I've named 2 officers, 1 cartel member. These 3 men were convicted, but with no bodies, all they could get was aggravated kidnapping. That just doesn't sit well with me, because that means they're eventually going to get out. With everything that happened, even with all the evidence, all the witness testimonies involved, they released the former mayor of Allende, Sergio Lozano. That's all the way to the top. The one thing that they could agree on was that there was a collaboration with Los Zetas. He knew that the attacks were coming and yet did nothing to protect the people of Allende. After the CNDH report in March of 2018, a new detention order was issued. It's unclear if there was ever an order issued for Director Trevino, even though he was seen outside the Garza Ranch and witnesses say he knew about the attacks ahead of time. Now, the Garza Ranch, that's where they took people to. This is where they cooked. This is where the cook was, He was there, and they were bringing people in, dead or alive. If they were alive, this is where they took care of that situation. And they cooked them in these giant, they cremated them essentially, threw them in these giant ovens, barrels, whatever they could. And they were just cooking bodies all night long until nothing remained but ash. It's one of the saddest things I've ever heard. And it really, like I said, this was one of the hardest episodes I've ever had to do. Lozano and Trevino were asked questions by investigators in 2012. In July, they were asked a nearly identical set of questions. One of those key questions being if they knew about the disappearances as they were happening. What actions had they taken to guarantee the security of the people of Allende? They both gave written statements that they had only limited understanding of the events that had occurred in March 18th through the 20th, 2011, and claimed that they had not received any reports about the violence as it was happening. So, all these people are being taken out of their houses being burned, people being killed in the streets. And you're telling me two officials had no clue what was going on? In 2014, dozens of people, including local firefighters, law enforcement, civilians, and municipal officers or officials, came forward to describe a city almost completely immersed in the criminal structure of Los Zetas. And if you don't know who Los Zetas are, they were one of the biggest cartels at one point. Their power has dwindled a little bit, but they're still around. And they, if I'm not mistaken, their head chiefs, who are the originals, if they're still the originals, were former military in Mexico. So they knew the weaponry, they had the skill, they were very methodical, they were very tactical, they were trained to kill. And when one of the other cartels fell, they took that moment to seize the opportunity and become the biggest, most dangerous cartel in Mexico at the time. Now, I think it's La Nueva Generación, so it keeps ever changing, the structure of Los Zetas, including the mayor and top police officials. Nearly all of those that were interviewed agreed that the surge in violence and the general pattern of police cooperation with the Zetas was evident for at least 1 to 2 years before all of this happened. An ex-police officer interviewed in July of 2014 told the investigators that from the moment that I joined the ranks of municipal police, I realized that all of the people I mentioned previously, including the mayor, police director, police commander, and the shift commander, were all linked to the Zetas criminal organization. The first of many witnesses to talk about the police departments linked to the cartels was an Allende official in charge of road maintenance. So not a police officer, not the mayor, not the governor, someone who takes care of the streets had the courage to stand up and talk about what was going on and link everything together, who told investigators in July of 2014 that everyone knows about the involvement of the officials and police, but is afraid to say anything. So the next day, investigators requested the roll call for all of the police that were active in 2011, and one by one interviewed them all. They talked to every single cop that was there in 2011. They were able to talk to. These officers described a variety of things that they had to do for the Zetas, from the most mundane all the way up to human trafficking. and drug trafficking. So the mundane, that could just be sent out to run errands, because it's not impossible to believe that the cartel members would be like, hey, go give me something to drink, go do something, right? Because they're flexing their power that they even have the control of the police to do whatever. Go pick up that bribe at the corner store, all the way up to bringing them people and bringing their drugs in. That's how powerful these people are. They extorted the bars and clubs, taking bribes, acting as lookouts, and if you crossed the Zetas and Allende, they would have the police arrest them till the Zetas showed up to take them away. So if you did something to anger one of the Zetas, they would have the police arrest you. They'd trump some charges up, you'd be arrested, and that's it. A police radio operator who worked closely with the shift commander said in his declaration that a ranking Zeta member would sometimes come by the police station and take people away from city jail cells, with the full knowledge of the police director and commander, both of whom were paid by the Zetas. A quote from the officer, or from a former Allende police official in November 12th, 2014, stated, now this is his quote, in fact, sometimes redacted would come to the municipal jail and take people away. I don't know who those people were, just that they were people that the police detained or his own people that he ordered to be locked up when they handled themselves badly, or people with whom he had a disagreement. In fact, he sometimes came and went inside the cells to beat those who were locked up. The director, who almost never left his office, knew all about this. He always knew what was happening. End quote. So in other words, a cartel member would go into the jail, go into the cells, take people or beat people in front of these officers, and leave. And everyone knew about it, and no one did anything about it. That just shows how much power they had, how much fear that they struck being there, that nobody would dare say anything. For their cooperation, most officers received between 2,000 to 3,000 pesos per month, which is about $175 to $260 US. So from peso to dollars US at that time, it would have been 260 to 175. So that's how much it costs to buy a cop in Mexico, in Allende. $175, $260. My cable bill is more than that. DirecTV. My phone bill is more than that. Verizon. I got a family plan. I got like 5 people on there. 4. Multiple devices. And it's about that price. Like, come on. So you're telling me that if I wanted to go to Mexico and buy a cop, it's about how much it was? Now, in today's money, talking about today, right? That same price, 2,000, 3,000 pesos, is $150 to $100. $100 for a cop. I don't even know what you can buy for $100. That's my groceries were $96. Some fruit, eggs, bread, meat, $100. I could have bought a cop and had it pay, and had him use his money to buy my groceries. That's ridiculous. That is a horrifying thing to think about. That you don't know who they're working for. Now, over here in the States, there's a lot of checks and balances, and you have those people who go around and they check cops, right? They're like, I'm live streaming, I'm videoing you for my protection, I'm a First Amendment or whatever, right? Those people. My question have always been, what happens when you come across an actual corrupt cop? Your footage isn't coming out. You are not going to come out. Now, if these people were doing that in Mexico, we would have never heard about those First Amendment people. They would have disappeared. How often do you think these payments were made? Every 2 weeks? Every week? No, once a month for $150. Let's do the math real quick. $150 once a month for a cop. That's on the low end. No, that's on the high end. 150 divided by 4, 37.50. 37.50 a week. That's in a 4 weeks to the month, But about $40 a week. That's how much a cop would buy. Shit, I got $50 in my pocket right now. That's terrifying to understand. Like $50. We're going to round up to 50, right? 40, $50 buys you a cop. They were delivered in individual envelopes starting at the top where they would get their part and all the way down. Some were on the payroll by choice, other by force. Most likely those that were there by force would get the least amount. And they'd be like, you'd be pressured in, like either join us or someone you know and love is going to disappear. And just for you saying, fine, I have to join y'all, they'd be like, here, take a little something to make you feel better. And they'd give you $100. Like, you can tell how much this gets to me. The reason all the police joined the cartel was because they needed the money or were scared to fight back or say anything against them. Now, when I say needed the money, Mexico doesn't do well financially every now and then. When I was a little kid, the peso was 10 to 1, 10 pesos to the dollar. Right now, pesos to dollar, 1 peso is worth about a nickel. 1 peso is worth 5 cents. I don't even have a nickel up here. I have nothing but dimes and quarters on my desk. Can you imagine that? So the American dollar was a thing, They would threaten to harm or kill them or their families and friends. That's sign us over about it. They would threaten to harm and kill them, or they would take their family and friends. One officer left because they kidnapped his father. He said this is his quote, and that I should go home and go to sleep. Can you imagine that? Like, I don't even know how to conceptualize that. That's like going to work and a heavy box of tools. You got to pick it up and put it on the shelf, and you ask your manager for help, and they're like, don't worry about it. Do it by yourself. Like, what? You're asking for help, but they couldn't do it. They were too afraid to help. He's like, just go to sleep. Don't worry about it. I would have raised hell if that was me. The police radio operator said that the commander and Hernandez and director Trevino were paid as much as 5 times what an ordinary officer would be paid. This is what he said. This is their quote. They gave Trevino a quota of 10,000 pesos every 20 days, and he did not get involved in what Redacted was doing. Also, the commander, Hernandez Ramos, who never did anything as he was employed by the Zetas, and also received payment. I don't know how much, and the Zeta would come in like he was in his own house without anyone saying a thing about it. End quote. Again, that is insanity. That was allowed, that a Zeta would be able to go into a building full of cops, do whatever he wanted, and leave. You can't walk up to a cop in the street here in the States without them be like, hey, you know what I mean? Like, they're ready. They're ready for anything. You go up to the police station saying you want to talk to a cop, they get suspicious. Like, I know a bunch of police officers, and I heard one of them was retiring. So I went to go say, hey, congratulations on the retirement. What are your plans? Just to talk a little bit, because I knew him. And I went up to the police station and I asked for him. It took so long for him to get here because they were nervous. Because I'm asking for a very specific officer to come to me. They don't know what I'm going to do. And I just wanted to talk to him because I knew him and he knew me. Once he saw who I was, he came up to me and talked to me. And everything was all fine. But, You can't walk up to cops here. But over there during that time, these members were there to basically do whatever they wanted. The cartel did whatever they wanted to these cops, and the cops did nothing. Witnesses say that up to 3 days before the massacre began in March 18th, 2011, Trevino called a meeting with Lozano and the Zetas and came to an agreement that municipal authorities would stand down for the cartel. Someone who attended the meeting said that Trevino said that things were going to get hot and that there had been meetings with the mayor and things were going to get ugly. What was the result of this meeting with Los Zetas? Police were ordered to stand down, not leave the office, and that if they did, it would be at their own. I know I covered this slightly last time in another meeting. In another meeting about what was happening, a top official had asked the mayor and police director why the military, the state, or the government hadn't been called to assist and help the people. They weren't called because they were scared. Now, if the mayor of Allende, the police chief, anybody would have reached out to the governor, the state police, the military, anybody, and the Zetas found out, but they'd be dead before the phone is back on the receiver, you know? Before they could hang up, they'd be dead. That's how fast that would happen. That's why they didn't call. That's why they didn't do anything. They were scared. This had fallen on deaf ears. In fact, the meeting only lasted 10 minutes. So, meeting with the cartels, the mayor, the police chief, about something so important, the fate of an entire town, only lasted 10 minutes. It takes me and my family longer than that to pick where we're going to go eat, let alone like a life-changing decision. You know how long it took me before I bought a house? And you're talking about the lives of an entire town changed in 10 minutes. Others had said that the mayor was upset because his people had left the office without there being any word that they could leave. So the mayor at least cared for his immediate people in his office. But they were leaving. He didn't want them to leave because they were told to wait for the Zetas to call them and be like, hey, all clear. We've done what we needed to do. Your people can go home. But people were just leaving because it didn't sit right. They were trying to go find their family and friends. But all it was doing was they were adding to what was going on. When asked about the violence, the mayor said that it was between, meaning, when asked about the violence, the mayor said it was between, oh my gosh, I forgot a line. Oh well. Meaning it was in the hands of the cartel. It was between them. I forgot a word. When asked about the violence, the mayor said that it was between them. In other words, the cartel and his people. Like the cartel and whoever they were dealing with, that was their thing. He did not care. That's what he said. He was like, it's just between them. Whatever they got going on, that's their thing. I don't know what's going on. Meaning it was in the hands of the cartel. His people had not agreed to not take any action with what was happening. When asked the following day to contact the governor, he said, don't be an ass. It's between them. Leave them. You know who they are. The town secretary had called the police director to let him know what was happening, and he said, don't even fart, you asshole, because if you don't keep quiet, they're going to kidnap you too. So he asked the mayor or the governor and the police chief, and they were both like, what are you doing? You're going to get us in trouble. Shut up. Stay in your lane. That's insane. Over time, the investigation had finally made progress with the establishment of a special task force in 2014. Soon authorities had discovered how deep this had gone. Links were soon discovered in other regions, Piedras Negras, Morelos, Nava, Zaragoza, and Villa Union. I always have trouble saying that. Sites of other attacks, not as bad as Allende. So these other places, Piedras Negras, Morelos, Nava, Zaragoza, and Villa Union, were sites of other attacks. This happened all over this part of town. This is where all this was happening. But it wasn't as bad. Allende was not an isolated incident, but rather the worst episode of an ever bigger problem of criminal violence and subversion of legal authority throughout the area. And the closest prison it had been turned into an operation hub for the Zetas. So in other words, that's where they set up shop. That was their main location. What about the police in these areas? They were nothing more than subcontractors for them. So wherever they went, they bought the police. And again, they were doing their dirty work, trafficking, shakedowns, and murders. This wasn't just a thing that had just started, it had been going on for years. It was already solidified. This is what, if you became a cop, you worked for the Zetas during that time. There was no doubt about it. That was it. That was about as common as like the police union. That was as common as going to eat lunch is like, I'm with the Zetas. Okay. I turn a blind eye, I get paid. I survive, I make it home. That's just how their mindset was. It's either they wanted the extra money and they were greedy and corrupt, or they were forced to do it because they wouldn't come out of it. And they wanted to go home to their families and provide for them, so they had to do it. After the massacre, many others were killed or just simply vanished in the following months that followed. In March of 2015, a pattern had emerged in 3 cases of particular importance. A woman whose husband had been kidnapped, detained, and murdered had told investigators what she knew. This is her quote. After what happened to my spouse in May of 2010, approximately 1 year later in June 2011, Redacted started looking for me. According to him, because my ex-spouse put him in charge of telling me what had happened to him. He told me many things related with acts of violence in the region, and I knew from his own words that he was an assassin for the Zetas cartel. And as we built some trust, I asked various things, end quote. And he told her how they killed someone's grandson, most likely Elvira Espinosa's, since she was one of the first to report disappearances in Allende. Can you imagine? They killed him by accident due to his family being kidnapped by accident. Like, because somebody like Elvira Espinosa had nothing to do with it. But they kidnapped her family because they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were associated with like the Garzas from the Garza Ranch. They were disappeared too. And that was it. And that's what started their issue. That's why it kidnapped by accident. That had nothing to do with it. You know? She also mentioned that before being taken to the ranch, they were taken to a cemetery in Piedras Negras, which means they were driven 2 miles out of town and back just to be murdered. So 4 miles. Takes just a few minutes to go 4 miles in and out of town. But to go to your death, you're going on a detour to a cemetery just to be lined up with more people from other areas to be taken to this ranch. All this led to where they were still operating and the methods and lengths they were going to. In her last testimony, she had said, he told me, this is her quote, he told me that inside the jail, Los Zetas were burning all of those people that I mentioned, as well as my spouse, who they burned inside that place after killing him. And more people from other parts of the state. They had brought people in from Sabinas, among others, an ex-federal highway official, other people from the municipalities of Zaragoza, Morelos. This was weeks after what happened in Allende. It can, end quote, it can be determined that given the time and place where many missing people disappeared from, that it can be, or from where many people, given the time and place where many missing people disappeared from, it can be said that it was linked to organized crime. That time frame was March 18th and 19th and the 20th of 2011. So in an area around the northern region was bad. So up there in Mexico, border towns essentially, it wasn't the place to be around this time frame. In 2017, the Federation for Human Rights, FIDH, submitted a communication to the Office of the Prosecutors of International Criminal Court, the ICC, detailing crimes against the civilian people, including murder, legal imprisonment, forced disappearance, torture, and sexual violence. Not just from when the massacre happened, but dating back to 2009 to 2016, 7 years. Pressure has been put on the Mexican government to prosecute top officials from Allende, including the former governors, for letting this happen and flourish. From what I can find, since 2011 to now, 2024, 13 years later, the people in Mexico are still waiting. So not much has been done, which is sad to say. At least to the top officials that let this happen. Around this time, the current president, Lopez Obrador, tried to put an end or limit the INAI, which is their version of the Right to Information Act. So like we have in the States, the Right for Information Act is you can go to a government office, fill out a bunch of paperwork, and get documents from the government about whatever cases that have been closed technically. That's their version, right? I mentioned them in a previous episode. I had mentioned all the work they have done for the Dirty War of Mexico that I spoke about in a previous episode. I believe that was last week's episode. On the U.S. side, the prosecutors had collected significant information, including testimony from Reyes Azarta, former federal police commander, and former Zetas had been collected by the DEA. The U.S. Department of Justice confirmed in the Freedom of Information Act denial letter to the National Security Archive that its investigation into the involvement of the DEA's link to the cartel violence. So they're saying they don't know what's going on. But we know it all started from a leak and both parties not acting or reacting to the issue. So it started from a leak on our side, spread down there. They didn't vet their people well enough, so it got leaked out and 300 people disappeared. All this started due to the DEA sharing information with a known corrupt unit of the federales known as the Sensitive Investigative Unit, the SIU. In my opinion, the DEA should have sent and had one of their agents in that unit to organize the information to help prevent the information being leaked. They have people in Mexico. The DEA has offices set up in Mexico. Why couldn't they have their people there to organize this, to personally vet somebody? That way it wouldn't be as big as it was. Or it probably wouldn't have happened at all. They would have been able to sneak in, grab the cartels, get them out. Dismantle the whole thing. Some good news for the people of Mexico. One high-ranking member of Los Zetas was sentenced to life in prison in an Eastern District of Texas court. I forgot the word court. This guy, known as El Vecino, the neighbor, was a drug trafficker that moved between the U.S. and Piedras and Allende. And that court was located in Plano, Texas. That's down the street. It's not down the street, it's like a 30-minute drive from here. His involvement with the massacre. This is what he did during that time, right? He went around with gunmen pointing out homes of relatives and associates of those that leaked the information, what they were doing. Yeah, so leaked their information. So he kind of knew who he was looking for, but he was kind of looking for just last names like, oh, they told me the Garzas live here, the Espinosas, whatever, right? He's just pointing out like there, essentially marking entire families to death. He watched as they went and murdered all these people and loaded them up into trucks and burned down buildings, getting rid of the evidence. That's it. That is the end. That is all the information I could find about what happened. That is what El Vecino did. He should have just stayed a drug trafficker, not get involved. But he got involved Oh well, now he's in prison for life. And that ends a dark day in Allende. That finally closes this chapter and we can move on. I can move on. I don't like talking too much about cartels because this episode's about cartels. The previous episode was, I believe, maybe cartels too. If I can't remember, my brain's fried right now. But also, next week's episode is we're gonna slowly switch back to the paranormal with next week's episode. Next week's episode is about the cartel still, but it also introduces a paranormal element. So we're slowly going to transition back to the paranormal for a while before we talk about criminal organizations and true crime again. So stay spooky, everybody, and please be careful out there. And until next time, later, guys.